Well, here we are with one of those short solo episodes. And this one, I will start speaking on the way that some try to invalidate the entire approach of this podcast, even though it's so openly saying and demonstrating again and again the inclusion of men and women together in this inquiry. Some would still like to disqualify what am putting forward here. Let's go there, shall we? Welcome to this provocative and heartfelt podcast where patriarchy is defined as a paradigm that both men and women uphold in different ways. Here you get to listen in on genuine conversations between leaders from around the world to discover more mutual respect and less division, as well as more pleasure and love in your life. My name is Dévashi Shakti, and you are warmly welcome to be part of these Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversations. Okay, so I'm going to make the assumption that if you're listening to this podcast, you at least have a pretty basic or foundational or even advanced understanding of the Western concept, Western psychology concept of the unconscious mind and how it works. Speaking for myself, this was a big part of the reason why, in my final year of high school, I decided that I wanted to be studying psychology at university so that I could specialize in hypnotherapy. It's not a path I ended up taking in the way I envisioned it at that age, but hypnotherapy is something that I have studied and would like to go further into because I know how empowering it can be to reorganize our belief systems and be able to navigate our way through the world based on the frameworks inside of our inner world. And that's where the unconscious mind comes in the way that we can unravel ourselves from our patterns from our karmic um, ancestral baggage, basically, and be able to create the experiences that we do want. But the thing is, um, while that is true, and while it is important to keep uh, navigating our experience in the world from our inner reality, I absolutely stand by and live by that. It would be an incredibly privileged thing to believe that the external circumstances have no impact on one's ability to activate their own will or their own authority. So I'm going to give a couple of examples to explain what I mean here, but I'll just quite openly say that I've noticed someone try to fault the approach of this podcast and particularly mention of patriarchy itself as a social construct, as a level of social engineering, social programming in the world that affects the entire world, the entire planet, in different cultures in different ways, and lives in the psyches of men and women, both in different ways, as this podcast is constantly suggesting through all of the past 50 something episodes. Um, it would be incredibly arrogant and privileged to say that the social context has no bearing on being able to create from within. Like there is a collision, there is a impact that our outer environment and the agreements within it, how that works with what we would prefer and how we can um, basically manifest or consciously create our reality from the inside out. While I thoroughly believe that and have lived by that for a very, very long time in order to support myself and many others, and I'm sure you have experienced similar if you're listening to this podcast. I'm going to make the assumption that you are already across the pretty basic levels of personal development, even the NLP world, which is one of the areas which goes into the value of learning how the unconscious mind works. You may have come across it in a lot of different ways, including positive psychology and affirmations and hypnotherapy, like I mentioned at the start, hypnosis guided audios, where you are entraining your thoughts, your conscious thoughts, to align with your unconscious thoughts and to pay more attention to what you're uncovering, what your unconscious thoughts even are, because that's the level of that has more weight, So our inner reality tends to be the dominant force in what we experience externally. So what I've noticed is that some people would like to debunk the collective inquiry going on here in the Beyond Patriarchal Sex space by saying that any reference to an external um, system, such as patriarchy, is somehow disempowered or missing the point because, yeah, it's referencing something that exists in the world and that it should be overcome by use of one's own individual will. And for someone to believe that, it either says that they are at the pretty much beginning, very beginning of comprehending social engineering, or working with the unconscious mind applied to the reality that we are living in, which is very complex, which does have um, a lot of repercussions for minority groups, including women, that affect us all differently. So while it's been discussed here in a lot of different ways throughout the episodes that patriarchy is also not in men's favor, and many of the male speakers have agreed with that, um, the type of men who feel they are positively benefiting from maintaining patriarchy as it is would like to thwart the mission of women like myself who have the courage to even name it or perceive it and name it at all, by saying that we should be somehow able to transmute this issue that we have through the power of our unconscious minds. And I need to laugh out loud about this. What do I mean by privilege? So, those at the top of the power pyramid in the human world, the power pyramid, which is based on patriarchy, the people, the humans at the top of that, I'm going to say false power pyramid because it's against nature. It's a human constructed paradigm. And it's why it's being so heavily questioned by so many people, including myself. It's why it's even naturally falling away with the it's orchestrating its own demise basically because it's so very unsustainable, being so against nature, against the feminine, attempting to assert itself over and over and over again during a universal planetary feminine awakening process, which guarantees its time is up. And see, two things or several things can coexist all at the same time. And this is a way of explaining what paradox is. And those who haven't had to deal with the more complex realities as a result of patriarchy, um, maybe have a little less experience when it comes to navigating paradox. So the certain men, and they're not, well, often people say, white patriarchal men, but it's not just white skinned men. There are caste systems, there are class systems, there is patriarchy in every culture all around the world, to different degrees, working in the ways that it does in politics and law, in um, yeah, in social narratives that are extremely impactful in the lives of everybody. And as it's been said all throughout this podcast, the minority groups, and most definitely including women, are the first to recognize when something is out of balance or against nature or against the feminine. Because under patriarchy, the rule of the father, where there is a strong dominant lean to the male way and the male approach and the male rule and the male approval, um, because it was decided so by men, not by God, not by nature, not by, um, like the real planetary reality in a pure, clean, energetic awareness way. It's a human construct, patriarchy. And those that are harmed by that construct, that false construct, are kind of like the canaries in the coal mine. And so they will feel the negative detriment of it first. Even though it affects everyone negatively, those that still feel empowered by it, those that feel like they don't want patriarchy to be questioned, those that feel like they want to maintain the entitlement on the top of that social power pyramid that patriarchy affords them, they don't appreciate all of the inquiry that's going on here necessarily. And they would like to thwart the mission, as I said, of women like myself or anyone like myself, anyone speaking up on behalf of these dynamics by suggesting that there is something victimhood like in the psychology of someone who's even able to mention it. And while there are people stuck in a victim identity, when they talk about patriarchy, that's most definitely true. It's not true that everyone using the word patriarchy is in a disempowered place or is in a victim psychology in order to mention the word. The thing is, it's just pattern recognition. Just like we can recognize that there is um, a level of political, social power. Sometimes they're called the elites, sometimes they're called the Illuminati, sometimes, they're just called the people who run the world. Whether we like it or not, it is so. And there's lots of things that can be said about it, but it is as it is. And it's been that way for a very long time. And there are a lot of people that like to bring awareness to it so that the collective individuation of the human soul can continue happening through education and through awareness. And in the way that I see it, patriarchy is just part of that paradigm of social engineering, part of that shadow control power play in the world, and specifically the way that it comes between the genders in a very private, interpersonal way and in a very public way and in a societal way, communities, relationships. I could go on about that, but the thing that I wanted to hone in on today is actually that if we were to say that there, okay, hypothetical scenario, even though there have been actual scenarios of this nature, imagine there are families who are living in a location where there has been unethical, um, say, pollution of some kind of chemical power plant. And that toxic substance, gas, whatever it is, has infected the children or the people that live in that area. And we know that there are definitely cases of this around the world at different times in different places. And so, is it a fault of those people that live in that location that they are failing to activate their positive psychology? Are they disempowered if they can recognize that they are made ill by the toxic fumes in their environment? Is it a fault of their disempowerment that their waterways or whatever it is have been infected with unhealthy chemicals and they are experiencing the consequences and the results of that? So, just like it would be highly inhumane and unethical to suggest that the children and the people of that location were personally failing and at fault to maintain their health in those conditions, it needs to be equally recognized that while patriarchy might not be a physical chemical substance, it is an invisible one, but its consequences do cause a type of illness or sickness that takes people away from their original nature, that causes discord and disharmony in the world between people and the environment, nature, between people and their own inner feminine nature, and between each other in the suppression and the repression of the feminine itself in a man, in a woman, between men and women, and on it goes in all of the other demonstrations and examples that could be spoken of. So, just like it's not a disempowered victim stance for those people to say that they are feeling harmed and have been harmed and made ill by the toxicity physically in their environment with some kind of chemical leak, it's also not a fault of the people who are able to discern that there is an unbalanced, unjust, unnatural force in the institutions, in the environment, that's causing a lot of harm and damage. If you are a woman, I want you to know about the work I do when not speaking on this podcast, which is all about how to live from your embodied womanly presence for your health on all levels, as well as it being a feminine spiritual path in itself. And it has a way of effortlessly unlocking your unique gifts to be a voice for women in the way that you are called to do so. And this happens through a facilitated training called Women's Somatic Sovereignty Certification. It gives you the chance to restore your own female nervous system, which I specialize in, while gaining the skills to be an effective somatic professional supporting women to thrive. Come to one of my free workshops to know more about this. We have a fantastic community of women to learn and to grow with, which has been going strong since 2005. So see the links below this episode for more on certification training. And it's a much harder thing to fully recognize when it's not a physical substance as such, when it is a virus of consciousness. And of course, if we're to track that deeper to the roots, it possibly isn't even called patriarchy anymore. It's more like wetiko. It's more of that esoteric nature that comes from the forces that would like to destabilize the harmony and the unity. And I'd like to also give another example to explain what I'm meaning here today. Having been involved in the somatic trauma therapy world for quite a long time, since 2010, actually, for myself directly, I was already working with it intuitively with Tigress before that, but officially in the somatic experiencing and other such communities since 2010. I've noticed that between then and now in 2026, there has been a change in how trauma recovery is perceived. Because, firstly, when the model of this many different types of trauma therapy in these somatic psychotherapy based communities have very much come from a Western mindset. And in that Western mindset, and I don't intend to make being Western wrong in bad or bad in any way, but my point is the hyper individualism within it is also something that is, well, a result of patriarchy for a start, but all and capitalism, but also it's unnatural and it is not in alignment with the feminine and the feminine within. Within that, known to be highly attuned, very caring, very compassionate world of somatic trauma healing and therapy, I believe it started to really come out around 2020, if not a little before, around attuning to the difference of working with personal and collective trauma when it comes to people that are experiencing the results of, for example, war in their outer environment. And previously, the main approach was based on the, I'm going to say, individual nervous system state and the regulation that is established through that trauma therapy work. Um, Individual, but it's really hyper individual. I think a lot of us that are white Western people or who have grown up in the Western psyche and context, we can sometimes not clearly perceive how hyper individual it actually is, and myself included within that model. It's just what I have been acclimatized to. But I am at least aware of how unnatural and how unhealthy it actually really is. But anyway, um, that approach was being applied to everyone without the nuances, without the level of attunement that's actually warranted for people that are oppressed by cultures that are based on that hyper individualism. So, for example, working with nervous systems and trauma on a personal level for people that are coming from war-torn countries and who are dealing with not just a personal disturbance in their nervous system, but their entire culture has been harmed, killed, constantly oppressed, still war in their country right now. These types of situations, there has to be a different awareness that's brought to these people. And I most definitely noticed the shift in the somatic psychotherapy community of people gradually getting the memo, so to speak, of referencing the collective level of trauma and more people talking about that and writing about that. So instead of someone just being asked to process and integrate personally what they are feeling inside of them, collective trauma came into the picture in a more clear way at some point. So, for someone that is experiencing, um, say they're Palestinian, whatever your thoughts and beliefs around the Gaza situation are, just even leave that aside for a moment. If you and I don't happen to be on the same page about that, it's a little irrelevant for this example that someone from Palestine, if they are being supported to help regulate their nervous system while the scenarios in Gaza were at their peak, the way of working with that person is not going to be effective if it's the same way as working with someone who's living in, say, an upper class European country, for example, where they do not have direct um, forces going on in their lives and in their families' lives and their community lives and in their whole country of being bombed, of people dying around them, for example. That's a very different scenario for two different people to be in. And so the level of acknowledgement of the collective trauma for the person who's in Palestine or is Palestinian witnessing that happen to their people while they're out in another country or something like that. Either way, acknowledgement of the collective trauma is essential to even be able to gain the trust of that person for them to feel safe with that therapist and even be able to come towards that more inner level where um, the attunement and the care and compassion can be applied for them to feel relative safety uh, for a period of time in their nervous system to support their inner stability. How can we expect one person who, in truth, is interdependently connected with everyone else to just be completely cut off from that and just expect them to develop and resource themselves to a level of stability that's the same as someone who does not have any acute harm, bombing, killing going on in their reality? It is not the same. It is not the same. And so I was really happy to see that shift come in and for it to be somewhat acknowledged in some of those training environments and community spaces in trauma therapy of needing to acknowledge the impact that our external and social environments have on our individual nervous systems. And so this was a development, this was an evolution, this was something that took time to happen. And so I'm going to come back to what I was saying at the start. For someone to look at this inquiry here with the Beyond Patriarchal Sex podcast and to judge and to decide that this is different to what it is, that it's somehow missing the point of personal empowerment. To anyone who sees it like that, I would love for them to comprehend that the compassionate collective view is actually an advanced perception. This is something that takes time to come to. And in fact, the hyper individualized, um, personal focus only that does not factor in collective patriarchy or collective oppression of any kind and doesn't factor in the reality of our interdependence on each other. Um, that perception in itself is very beginner. It's hasn't evolved to calibrate the bigger picture yet. And so some of the NLP systems, some of the positive psychology systems are still founded on the level of awareness that was around at the time those systems were created. And in some environments, they really haven't been updated. And so they're not going to teach you that. They're not going to tell you that. So anyone who's coming across that information is actually missing the memo. So I suppose the most important thing to relay here is that comprehending that the personal and the collective go side by side and are equally as important as each other, that awareness in itself is part of the collective planetary feminine awakening, feminine with a capital F, in the way that's relevant as the feminine principle to men just as much as it is to women. And this is where unity comes in. This is where understanding each other's lived experience becomes so essential. This is where wisdom and empathy grows. And so, anyone that would like to mistakenly try and teach me that comprehending the collective inquiry that's being offered here as anything less than what it is, I hope that this little chat here has helped you to catch the memo that has just slowly been moving through different healing, personal development, awareness spaces over the past decade or so, and hasn't even made it into some places, and would lead some to believe that the hyper individualistic model is the way and the only way and the superior way. This is part of patriarchy. This is part of the elitist thinking that is not in anyone's favor. So I recommend following up some of the terms that you've heard here today if they're new to you, if you are someone that happens to align with that way of thinking. And if you're more like myself, where you already resonate and get what I'm saying here, but you maybe have people around you who are like the type of person that I've mentioned on this solo episode today, that are assuming that all and any person, especially women who use the term patriarchy, are not getting it, are unevolved, are not empowered, and to put all people who have the courage to make use of this term into some kind of category in a really uneducated and ignorant way. Perhaps you could share some of these examples that I've given here today. Yeah, to illustrate the difference here. And, I believe it's important to really connect with whoever it is in our lives that we're talking to, and to compassionately listen to them, and to maybe offer them examples that are relevant to their world, or it just in ways that they can understand. Because truly, I see all these opportunities to educate, an opportunity to help bring awareness where you can see it's so, so missing. And it is basically part of the planetary feminine awakening to develop the patience that it takes to support someone to be able to understand things on that bigger picture level, which is truly where the most empathy and care is going to come from. So, the personal empowerment paradigm is essential. The collective empowerment paradigm is also essential, and they both coexist together. And this is why it's a more complex reality to start to look at the whole elephant in the room as such, if we're talking about patriarchy and patriarchal sex. So I have many more things like this to share with you, but I'm going to leave that to other episodes, and I look forward to sharing them with you next time. Thank you for sharing this episode if it's moved you, and know that saving or sharing it around, it genuinely helps to spread this message, and also to attract more interesting speakers to join the Beyond Patriarchal Sex conversations. And there is much more to come, so keep tuning in to these weekly episodes so that we can all be part of shifting division into connection for ourselves and for the coming generations.